Before the world saw him as the face of Rocky or the soul of Rambo, Sylvester Stallone was fighting a very different kind of war. Not in the ring, not in the jungle, but inside the walls of Hollywood itself. Behind that calm stare and sculpted frame was a man at war with his own legend. The cameras showed the champion. But behind closed doors, he was breaking friendships, clashing with icons and turning fame into fire. His temper destroyed trust. His pride created enemies, and some of those grudges nearly tore apart the biggest films ever made. These were not scripted fights. They were real, and they left scars that never healed. Tonight, we uncover the names, the betrayals, and the battles Stallone never wanted the public to see. You may think you know him, but after this, you will see the man behind the myth. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the stories Hollywood tried to bury. And tell me, what time is it where you are watching right now? Morning, afternoon, or late at night? Thank you for being here as we step into the hidden wars of Sylvester Stallone. The first name on Stallone's secret list was Arnold Schwarzenegger. Among all the rivals he faced in his long career, none stood taller, louder, or more dangerous than the man from Austria. Their story was not just about fame. It was about pride, strength, and the need to be the best in a world that only remembers winners. It began in the winter of 1977 at the Golden Globe Awards in Beverly Hills. The chandeliers shimmered, the champagne sparkled, and Sylvester Stallone was ready for victory. Rocky had changed everything. Only a year earlier, he had been an unknown actor, living in a cramped apartment, selling his dog to buy food. Now he was the new symbol of the American dream, the underdog who refused to stay down. That night was supposed to be his celebration. Across the ballroom sat a newcomer with the body of a sculpture and the grin of a conqueror. Arnold Schwarzenegger had just stepped out of the world of bodybuilding and into Hollywood. He was young, confident, and already carried himself like a champion. When the awards began, Stallone waited for his name to be called. Instead, he watched as Rocky lost one category after another, and every time the announcer skipped over him, Arnold laughed. When Arnold finally won the title of New Star of the Year, Stallone's pride cracked. He later confessed that in a moment of fury, he grabbed a bowl of flowers and hurled it toward Arnold. That moment lit a fire that would burn through the next 15 years. The decade that followed became their private battlefield. Stallone represented grit and emotion, the sweat and heart of every man who fought for a dream. Arnold represented power and perfection, the unstoppable force from another world. Between them, their films earned more than $3 billion across the globe. But it was never about the money. It was about dominance. When Stallone released Rocky II, Arnold answered with Conan the Barbarian. When Rambo exploded on screens, the Terminator marched in to claim his own victory. Every movie was a punch, every line a counterpunch. Even their slogans clashed across billboards. One shouted, "Yo, Adrian," while the other promised, "I will be back." They were not just actors. They were warriors fighting for the same throne. In The Comedy Twins, Arnold mocked a Rambo poster with a smirk that said it all. Stallone responded in Tango and Cash by beating down a lookalike of Arnold, not once, but twice. Fans laughed, but they knew the rivalry was real. The tabloids fed it like fuel on a fire. Reporters wrote that these two men could not exist under the same Hollywood sky. Then came the moment that changed everything. Arnold discovered a script so terrible it could destroy any actor's career. It was called Stop or My Mum Will Shoot, pretending to want the role. Arnold spread the word that he was after it. Stallone's pride took the bait. He accepted the script, determined to prove he could match Arnold's comedy success. The film premiered in 1992 and crashed immediately. Critics destroyed it. calling it one of Stallone's worst. It earned less than $10 million on its opening weekend. Years later, Arnold admitted with a grin that he had planned the trap. For Stallone, it was humiliation in front of the world. For over a decade, they avoided each other completely. Studio executives had to arrange separate schedules so they would not meet at the same events. One producer even joked that getting them in the same room would cost more than making another action film. Fans took sides, arguing over who was the real king of the 80s. But time has a way of turning fire into ash, and by the early 2000s, both men had aged. Their bodies still strong, their egos finally calm. One day, Stallone reached out and called Arnold. He said it was time to do something together, not as rivals, but as brothers of the same legacy. That call created The Expendables, and when they appeared side by side on screen, audiences erupted with applause. For the first time in 30 years, the two titans stood united. Not long after, they opened Planet Hollywood together, smiling for cameras and signing autographs like old generals who had survived the same war. Stallone later said that rivalry made him stronger, that without Arnold pushing him, he might have lost his edge. Arnold agreed and called it the best competition of his life. Their war began with anger and ended with respect. Two men who once tried to destroy each other ended up defining an entire era of cinema. They were not just rivals. They were reflections. One was fire, the other was iron. And when they collided, Hollywood never shone brighter. The second name on Stallone's list belonged to a legend. Kirk Douglas was old Hollywood royalty, a man whose name carried the weight of Spartacus and the golden age of cinema. Stallone had grown up watching him on screen, learning from his power and confidence. And so when the chance came to work with him, Stallone believed it was destiny. Two generations of strength meeting on one stage. It happened in the early 1980s, during the making of a film that would define Stallone's career. The title was First Blood. The story of John Rambo, a broken soldier who had survived war only to be rejected by his own country. Stallone had written much of the script himself. It was not just another action movie. It was a story about survival, loneliness, and the quiet rage of forgotten men. When Kirk Douglas agreed to play Colonel Troutman, the man who understood Rambo better than anyone, Stallone felt honoured. To have the star of Spartacus guiding his creation seemed like the perfect match, but from the first week of rehearsal, something went wrong. Douglas did not just want to act, he wanted to command. He had studied the original novel by David Morrell and believed the story should end with Rambo dying. Again and again, he told the director, Rambo must die. Troutman must pull the trigger. He said it was poetic, noble and final, but Stallone disagreed completely. To him, Rambo's survival was the point. It was hope in the middle of despair. It was about every veteran who had been forgotten by the world but refused to disappear. The arguments grew tense. On set, Douglas would rewrite his lines, question every decision and push for the tragic ending. The director, Ted Kotcheff, tried to keep peace, but the energy had turned sour. Stallone could feel the control of his film slipping away. For him, Rambo was more than a character. He was a message, a symbol of pain that could not be silenced. One afternoon, after another long argument, Kotcheff finally snapped. He turned to Douglas and said calmly, "This is the movie we are making. If you do not like it, you can leave." Douglas stared at him, nodded once, and walked off the production. Just like that, a legend was gone. It was chaos. The studio panicked. Filming was about to start, and one of the key roles had vanished. Within a day, the team brought in another actor, Richard Crenna, to take the part. Crenna arrived on set with almost no preparation, memorising his lines on the way. But something unexpected happened. His calm, fatherly presence balanced Stallone's intensity perfectly. Together they built a quiet chemistry that carried the entire film. When First Blood was released in 1982, it became a worldwide success. Critics praised its emotional power, and audiences connected deeply with Rambo's struggle. It was the birth of a franchise that would earn over $1 billion in the years that followed. But behind the success, Stallone never forgot what had happened. He respected Douglas as a legend, but could not forgive his arrogance. Years later, he remarked that some actors care more about their exit than the story itself. It was a short sentence, but everyone knew who he meant. In interviews, Douglas rarely spoke of the incident. He had moved on to other projects, but among Hollywood insiders, the story never died. People whispered that Kirk Douglas could have been part of one of the greatest action series of all time, but walked away because of pride. For Stallone, the lesson was bitter and clear. Respect was not enough. Even heroes could turn into obstacles when ego took control. He had entered that project as a student and walked away as the teacher. The man he had once admired became the man he could never trust again. Years later, when asked about the making of First Blood, Stallone's answer was calm but sharp. He said that sometimes you have to lose a star to save a story. Without that decision, Rambo might have died on the screen, and so would the message he carried. The second name on his list was not born from hatred, but from disappointment. Kirk Douglas had been a hero of the old world, yet in that moment he forgot what made heroes eternal. In the end, First Blood survived. Rambo lived. And the world met a new kind of warrior. Kirk Douglas became the man remembered not for saving the film, but for almost killing it. The third name on Stallone's list was not an enemy from the battlefield of movies, but from the battlefield of friendship. Eddie Murphy was not a rival in muscles or box office strength. He was something rarer. Someone Stallone had once called a brother. And that made the fall between them all the more painful. It began in the late 1980s when both men were at the very top of Hollywood. Stallone ruled the world of action, the king of sweat and steel. Murphy was the crown prince of comedy, a man who could make the world laugh with a single look. Together they seemed unstoppable. Two sides of the same coin. They met often, laughed loudly, and traded stories about fame, women, and the weight of carrying an entire industry on their shoulders. For a few years, they were inseparable. They partied together in Los Angeles, attended the same charity events, and defended each other in interviews. Hollywood had never seen an alliance like that. The tough guy and the funny man, both on fire, both adored by millions. But in a city built on cameras and whispers, no friendship stays untouched for long. The spark that destroyed it all appeared in 1987. Eddie Murphy had just begun filming Beverly Hills Cop 2, the sequel to one of the biggest hits in comedy history. Stallone's wife at the time, the model Brigitte Nielsen, had been cast in the film. She was striking, confident, and hard to ignore. On set, her chemistry with Murphy drew attention. People talked, and a few crew members joked about how close they looked between takes. Then the tabloids got hold of it, and everything exploded. Rumours of an affair filled every magazine rack in America. The headlines were brutal. They called it betrayal, a secret romance behind Stallone's back. Even if none of it was true, the damage was done. Stallone, known for his pride, could not ignore it. He called Murphy directly, demanding answers. "What happened between you and her?" he asked. Murphy denied everything. He said it was gossip, nothing more. But gossip in Hollywood is like smoke. Once you see it, you cannot pretend there is no fire. From that moment, trust was gone. At parties, they avoided eye contact. Friends who once stood between them now had to choose sides. The laughter that had once filled their nights turned to silence. Stallone felt humiliated, not only as a husband, but as a friend. The betrayal, real or imagined, cut too deep. By the time the 1990s arrived, the friendship was dead. Murphy moved on with his comedies, breaking records and setting trends. Stallone buried himself in his work, channeling pain into new projects, yet the press never stopped comparing them. Who was earning more? Who was still relevant? Who had fallen? The public loved the tension. Every box office chart became a scoreboard. Years later, Murphy admitted that the rumour had been poison. He said it was sad how lies could ruin something genuine, but Stallone never commented again. To him, silence was the final word. What made this feud so tragic was its quietness. There were no punches thrown, no public insults, no scandals shouted across microphones, only distance. The kind of distance that grows between people who once trusted each other completely. Stallone could forgive rivals, even enemies. But betrayal from a friend, imagined or not, was something he could never erase. The fallout extended far beyond personal pain. Hollywood, always hungry for comparison, began to pit their careers against each other. Murphy became the face of laughter, Stallone the symbol of grit. They no longer shared stages or headlines. The men who once toasted success together now existed in different worlds. Time passed. Decades later, both would look back and realise how rare that friendship had been. But by then, it was too late. The city that builds stars also buries connections beneath its glitter. The third name on Stallone's list was not a rival who mocked him or a legend who challenged his art. It was a friend who once stood beside him and then disappeared into a cloud of rumour. In the end, there were no winners. Only two men at the height of their power, torn apart by the very thing Hollywood thrives on: talk. For Stallone, it was the cruelest lesson of all. Fame can buy you success, but it cannot protect you from betrayal. And sometimes the silence that follows is louder than any gunfight on screen. The fourth name on Stallone's list was born from a single mistake, one that involved nothing more than a sandwich and a drop of mustard. Yet it grew into one of the most infamous grudges in Hollywood history. The year was 1974. Before the fame, before the glory of Rocky. Stallone was just another hungry actor trying to make a living. He had co-written a small film called The Lords of Flatbush, a gritty story about young men searching for identity in the rough neighbourhoods of Brooklyn. It was meant to be his first big step toward recognition. That was when Richard Gere entered the picture. Gere was another rising star, trained in theatre, handsome, meticulous and ambitious. On paper, the combination of Gere's precision and Stallone's raw energy should have been perfect. In reality, it was a storm waiting to happen. From the first day on set, their approaches clashed. Stallone worked with instinct and emotion, improvising lines and channeling his own frustration into the character. Gere rehearsed every word, adjusted every movement, and treated each scene like a performance on a Broadway stage. The difference between them was more than style. It was pride. Stallone saw Gere as arrogant. Gere saw Stallone as undisciplined. And then came the incident. One afternoon, the crew was filming a scene inside a cramped car. The air was thick, the lights hot, and tempers already short. Gere, sitting beside Stallone, was eating a chicken sandwich between takes. A moment later, a streak of mustard dripped from Gere's sandwich onto Stallone's pants. The set went silent. In a flash of temper, Stallone pushed Gere out of the car. Some witnesses said he threw an elbow first. Others said he simply shoved him away. What mattered was the message. Stallone was not going to share space with him any longer. Gere hit the ground in front of the crew, his sandwich crushed, his pride shattered. The producers tried to calm things down, but it was too late. Within a day, Gere was dismissed from the project. The official reason given was creative differences, but everyone on set knew the truth. Stallone had won the power struggle. The film went on without Gere, and Stallone's career soon took off. But for Gere, the humiliation never faded. In the years that followed, Whenever asked about his early work, he avoided the subject entirely. Rumours of the fight spread through Hollywood. Told and retold in dressing rooms and interview, it became legend. The mustard incident that no one forgot. As Stallone rose to fame with Rocky and Rambo, Gere carved his own path in films like American Gigolo and An Officer and a Gentleman. Both found success. Both built empires. But the wall between them remained. They never worked together again, never spoke in public, never shared a red carpet. Decades later, when journalists tried to ask about the story, Stallone only smiled and said there had been a personality clash. Behind that careful answer was something deeper. Stallone had always been driven by dominance, by the need to prove himself in every room he entered. For him, that incident had been about respect. For Gere, it had been about humiliation neither man forgot. In time, people tried to laugh about it, calling it the pettiest feud in Hollywood. But to those who understood Stallone's pride, it made perfect sense. To him, even a stain of mustard could become a symbol of disrespect. The fourth name on his list was not a superstar rival or an old mentor. It was a man who once shared a car seat and a chance until pride turned a simple accident into a lifelong divide. Some feuds start with betrayal, others start with ambition. This one started with mustard, and long after the cameras stopped rolling, that single drop never really dried. The fifth name on Stallone's list hurt the most because it belonged to a man he once called a brother. Bruce Willis was not an enemy. He was family. At least, and that was how Stallone saw it before everything fell apart. Their story began not in rivalry, but in respect. By the late 1980s, both had become icons of a new kind of action hero. Stallone was the relentless fighter, the man who turned pain into victory. Willis was the everyman with a smirk and a gun, the underdog who outsmarted villains with grit and humour. Together with Arnold Schwarzenegger, they ruled an entire generation of cinema. Years later, when Stallone decided to create a film that would bring back the spirit of that golden age, he knew exactly who he wanted by his side. The idea was simple but powerful. Gather the old warriors of action, men who had defined courage for the world, and unite them for one last mission. That dream became The Expendables. Yeah. When Stallone called Bruce to join the cast, the answer came fast. Willis agreed, and their reunion made headlines. Fans cheered. Critics called it a celebration of the past. For Stallone, it was more than that. It was a loyalty made visible. He believed this project was not just a movie, it was a brotherhood. In the first two films, Willis played a shadowy CIA figure named Church. The role was small but important, the man behind the mission, the one who gave the team its purpose. The chemistry between them worked. Their friendship seemed unbreakable on and off screen. They laughed together, posed for photos, and reminded audiences of what Hollywood used to be. Then came the year 2013, and everything changed, Wolfgang. When Stallone began preparing The Expendables 3, he expected Bruce to return. But during negotiations, Willis made a demand that shocked everyone. He wanted $4 million for 4 days of filming. No discounts, no compromise, just a simple deal, $1 million a day. To the studios, it was just business. To Stallone, it was betrayal. He had built the franchise around loyalty and camaraderie, not greed. The numbers felt like a slap in the face after everything they had shared. This was how his brother valued their bond. Stallone refused. Instead, he reached out to Harrison Ford to take the role. The decision was quick, cold, and final. What came next was even colder. Stallone went public. He wrote on his social platform that greed and laziness were poison, and everyone knew exactly who he was talking about. The words spread like wildfire, and overnight, the media turned the story into a headline war. The Expendables 3 went on without Willis. It grossed more than $200 million worldwide. But something was missing. The spark of brotherhood that had defined the first two films was gone. Fans noticed it immediately. Behind closed doors, Stallone felt a mix of anger and sadness. He had not just lost a co-star, he had lost a friend. For decades, both men had stood as symbols of strength and independence. Now that image had cracked. For Willis, the damage was just as heavy. Hollywood began whispering that he was difficult, that he cared more about money than legacy. The rumours grew until they became part of his reputation. Even as he continued to act, the shadow of that fallout followed him everywhere. In the years that followed, there was silence. No reconciliation, no public apology, no reunion. At award shows, they passed each other without a word. Reporters asked about the feud, but neither answered. The friendship that once defined the spirit of action cinema had vanished like smoke. Time moved on. But Stallone never forgot. For him, that story became a warning about what happens when loyalty meets ego. He often said that real strength is not in the body, but in the bond between men who fight side by side. The fifth name on his list was proof that even brotherhood has a breaking point. Bruce Willis had not betrayed him with words or violence, but with a number. A number that felt like a wall between two men who once believed in the same dream. In the end, both paid a price. Stallone lost a friend. Willis lost the trust of a man who had once called him brother. Years later, fans still hoped they would stand together again. The old soldiers reunited for one last salute, but Hollywood rarely gives second chances. The fifth name on Stallone's list was not written in anger, but in regret. Because sometimes the hardest thing to forgive is not hatred, but disappointment. And that disappointment lingered longer than any bullet ever could. 6. By the time the smoke cleared, 6 names had shaped the story of Sylvester Stallone's hidden wars. 6 faces that once stood beside him, laughed with him, or fought against him, now lived forever in the shadows of his memory. Each one had carved a scar, a lesson, and a truth about the cost of being who he was. Arnold Schwarzenegger taught him that rivalry can be both poison and power. Kirk Douglas reminded him that pride can destroy even the greatest partnership. Eddie Murphy showed that trust is fragile, that friendship can fall apart faster than fame can rise. Richard Gere proved that ego does not need words to speak. Sometimes it only needs a stare. Bruce Willis revealed that loyalty, when measured in money, becomes the most painful betrayal of all. Together. These stories form a portrait of a man who lived not just to act, but to survive the endless wars of Hollywood. To the world, Stallone was the hero with fists of iron, the man who could take a beating and still stand tall. But behind the curtain, he was something else entirely. He was human. Proud, wounded, and hungry for respect. He came from nothing, born into struggle, raised in noise and rejection. He fought for every inch of ground he ever gained. That hunger never left him. It followed him through every script, every fight, every award show. It became both his weapon and his curse. In the beginning, it drove him to greatness. But as the years went on, it made him see enemies where there were once friends. Fame had lifted him up, but also built walls around him that even his strength could not break. In the 1980s and 90s, Stallone was not just a movie star. He was an empire. His face filled posters across continents. His voice echoed in theatres packed with millions. Yet even then, when cameras flashed and crowds cheered, there was always a part of him that felt alone. Perhaps that is what happens when the whole world watches you win. You start to believe every loss must be hidden, The names on his list were never about revenge. They were about remembrance. Each one reminded him of a moment when pride clashed with trust, when the dream collided with reality. They were the ghosts of lessons learned too late. For Stallone, forgiveness did not come easily. But as time passed, something softened when age caught up. He began to see the faces differently. Arnold, no longer a rival, became a friend again. He learned that even enemies can share the same respect when they have walked through the same fire. He saw that the real victory was not in winning the fight, but in surviving it with a soul still intact. Kirk Douglas, Eddie Murphy, Richard Gere, Bruce Willis, each of them had played a part in shaping him. Without those confrontations, without those cracks in his armour, Stallone might have remained just another action star. Instead, he became a symbol of endurance, the man who refused to be broken, even when life itself threw the hardest punches. In the end, every feud had a meaning, every betrayal had a cost. And every scar told a story louder than any script could write, and the world saw muscles, explosions, and heroes who never fell. But what they missed was the quiet man behind the camera, trying to make sense of his own battles. When Stallone looked back, he once said that pain was the best teacher he ever had. It taught him humility, even when he did not want to learn it. It taught him silence, even when he wanted to shout. It taught him that fame fades, but integrity remains. The final lesson was simple but eternal. Strength means nothing without grace. A man can conquer the screen, but he is nothing if he cannot conquer himself. Stallone learned that the real fight was never against Arnold, Kirk, Eddie, Richard, or Bruce. The real fight was always against his own reflection. As the lights dimmed on the decades that made him immortal, the man who once played Rocky and Rambo found peace not in victory, but in acceptance. He no longer needed to win. He only needed to remember. And so the list became more than memory. It became a mirror one that showed him not who he hated, but who he had been. 6 names, 6 battles, 1 truth. The greatest wars are never fought on screen. They are fought in the heart. 7 of all the stories we have shared tonight, 1 truth remains clear to me. Success never comes without its wounds. The journey of Stallone is not only about fame or rivalry, but about the human heart and the weight that comes with ambition. Every victory he earned carried a cost. Every friend he lost became a lesson in humility, and every conflict reminded him that even legends bleed when pride takes control. What I see in his story is a reflection of all of us. Strength is not just about power or toughness. Real strength is found in how we face disappointment, betrayal, and regret. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is forgive. Sometimes it is learning to walk away. Stallone's battles teach that it is never the punches on screen that define a person, but the quiet ones fought inside. Maybe that is the real message hidden behind the lights of Hollywood. We all fight private wars. Some fight for understanding, some for peace, and others simply to keep standing when life pushes them down. What matters is not how hard we fall, but how deeply we learn each time we rise again. So as this story closes, take a moment to think about your own battles. Are they still holding you back, or have they helped you grow? Remember, peace begins when you decide to stop fighting yourself. If this story touched you, please subscribe to the channel so we can share more journeys that remind us what strength and forgiveness truly mean. And tell me, what time is it where you are watching right now? Morning, afternoon, or late at night? Thank you for being here and for staying until the very end. End.